By way of introduction, I'm Joe, one of the recruitment consultants here at Fruition IT. So for those that don't know who we are, we're a tech recruitment firm based up in Leeds, and we're very involved in the tech community. And obviously this is strange times at the moment, so we want to make sure we keep the tech community engaged and put a webinar series together called Lockdown Learning. So this is the 8th in the series now. So today we'll be hearing about a journey from bespoke to standardized platform engineering, the pros and cons of each, and what the impact of this will be and what it has on the engineering function. So Luis Silva from DAZN has kindly offered us the time to talk through his journey of platform engineering. So without further ado, I guess over to you, Luis.
Well, thanks very much. Well, welcome everyone into this journey into platform engineering. As Joe said, just going to go into a small intro about me. I'm Luis Silva. I'm the principal cloud engineer at DAZN. I've been roughly doing this sort of thing for about 10 years, roughly 12. And I've been doing like DevOps, SRE, cloud, and platform engineering throughout this period. And if you kind of correlate my start of my career with cloud computing, you see that around 2008, when I started working, is when AWS was in its infancy. So I kind of started my career already in the cloud world, right? the cloud native. And this is why when you look at it, I have DevOps, SRE, cloud, and platform engineering roles, but not the traditional developer or ops person or something like that. And across my career, I've started with working with startups, with big companies, as a contractor, as a perm, with consultancy companies, and directly with the companies themselves. And it's kind of given me a view of how different companies do different things, how cloud and DevOps came about and grew, and how all those teams work together, and what works well, what doesn't work so well. And as time went by, I started getting my own ideas of how things should work and how things should be done. I'm not saying that is the only way or is the right way. Is according to my experiences. This is what has kind of worked or hasn't worked, and this is why I want to take you a little bit on this journey into platform engineering. This is what we want to end up. This is what we do at DAZN. But to get there, I want to kind of give you the context and the background of how my view on how this world progressed in the last 10 years. So if you start looking at like the first stage, this has been discussed to exhaustion. Like on every meetup, every conference about DevOps, this always comes up, right? The silos, that age where you have those three separate departments. We're just going to focus on these departments. There's obviously a lot more, but for what we want to focus on here, this is what matters. But you have the development, operations, and QA departments / teams. Right? So we went on to the usual, like the devs, like those computer scientists or software engineers, self-taught developers, like all those people that were responsible for creating the software that would actually end up in production and people would use. So that they were the geeks, the nerds, the ones in the corner doing all that cool stuff with the code. Right? And then you have the extra department of operations, all the admins, right? For a long time, a lot of my friends would just call me, "Hey admin, can you sort this out?" Because I would do a lot of admin related, operational related tasks as well. So you got all those sysadmins, network admins, DBAs, and they were all responsible for the underlying systems and the code that ran in production. And with that comes all the usual sayings of throwing over the wall, or it's not my fault, it worked on my box, because there was all this joint responsibility between the teams. And let's not forget about QA, or the testers, that catch-all phrase for all those people that had a variety of backgrounds, right? You talk to different people and they would come from some development, some operations, some were more product oriented, some were just responsible to make sure that what was delivered to the client matched the requirements and there were no regressions. So it was a lot of, we need to please the testers, because otherwise this is never going to get released. So this was what we all knew happened before, and hopefully it doesn't happen that much anymore. But there were a few pros to this setup in a sense that you kind of had a lot of experts doing specific things. Right? You had the PHP or the Java developers, and that's what they did. You had all the DBAs, they knew Oracle and Postgres and MySQL from end to end, and all the little tweaks and tunes to make it work. So that was nice to have that sort of people with that capacity doing the work. But at the same time, that meant they can do anything else. Right? So they were so focused on a specific thing that then created these silos, and there was no end-to-end responsibility for the product. It was always someone else's fault. And as we know, usually when a problem happens, it's not just one thing bad that happens, not just one thing that goes wrong. It's a combination of factors that leads to the failure. And with this scenario, there was no way to fix that quickly, because all those problems come from all those different teams and people and interactions, and it's just really hard to make this work. So naturally, people realize that this doesn't really work. So we will have to go on to a next stage of this evolution, and kind of the introduction of the DevOps concept, which I tend to think of it as Ops V2, because if you look at it visually, you realize you still have the same development teams, you still have the same keyways, but now Ops is not kind of called DevOps. A lot of the progression was, we're not Ops people anymore, we're just DevOps. And if you just zoom in at what happened is you got the melting pot of backgrounds, because Ops is no more. So what happened to all those people that were considered Ops or the admins before? They kind of started getting mixed up on the DevOps world. So you had the standard Ops people, you had some devs that started looking at it and realizing this is actually starting to get interesting, because they're starting to use a little bit more code to their operations, right? You have some tools like config management is starting to come up, like CF Engine, Chef, Puppet, all those things starting to come up and get a lot of traction. And companies like HashiCorp coming around, and some of their products coming up. Vagrant, for example, was very popular for a while. So all those things starting to show up was starting to enticing devs to come up into this dark world of operations, right? At the same time, you have cloud computing coming up in force. So a lot of APIs for many things starting to open the doors for this sort of automation and development way of doing things. But that meant that we also needed people that knew how to use the cloud. And for a while, like I mentioned before, I was doing cloud architectural roles, not that because I was a solutions architect, right, and doing TOGAF and all that, like applying all those frameworks. It's just because I knew how to use cloud well and do cloud native architectures in there. So you start to have the concept of architectures as well in DevOps to make things work in the cloud, right? And security, which eventually led to the whole DevSecOps concept, because you also need to embed this now with everything that you're doing, because you no longer have a 2-year long running process for things. Things are starting to happen much quicker. Tools are changing very fast. So there isn't that much time to say, let's put a ticket in security backlog, let's discuss this for a month and then let's go back. So we're starting to get a lot of backgrounds pouring into DevOps. But if you really know what DevOps is, this is a bit misleading, right? Because you say a DevOps team, if you have a DevOps team, you're not actually doing DevOps. This is, for me, this is a key point, and it's controversial. There's always raises some discussion, but that's the thing, right? If you have a team, then it's not actually doing DevOps, not really end to end. And there's sort of pros and cons to this setup as well. It's still doing the old problems of the developments are still writing code and relying on DevOps to build the pipelines, to build the monitoring. They push the code to a Docker registry, fine, but then some of us will have to pull it and deploy it, right? So the DevOps will do that. And in theory, all containers should run everywhere, but we all know it's not the case. It just depends on daemon configurations, and it's not a given that just because it works as a Docker container on one box is going to work on the other. So all these things started to solve the problems and be a step forward, but it's still, for me, it's still like a an Ops V2, there's really no that big of a transformation. And if you dealt with recruitment during this phase, it was tough. As I was contracting and finding roles and moving from company to company, you speak to recruiters and they'll say, okay, I want a DevOps, but I want a DevOps with a dev background. Or I want a DevOps with a systems background. It's like, well, I'm a DevOps with a DevOps background because I didn't come from development or I didn't come from ops. I started in this cloud world and in this way of doing things, not migration from old to new. And that always led to some interesting conversations up to a point that it just kind of had to stop because the recruiter would just say, okay, this smart ass, I'm not going to waste this time, my time with him. Because it was quite a new world and it was hard to explain that, it wasn't necessarily the way that it should be, but it was the way that, that it was working.
So if you give them some details,
sorry, there's
tell
someone
which credit card might be good for
with
you.
the microphone not muted.
Do you think you should do that?
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay.
If you're on the call, do you mind just muting? That's it. Cool. Thank you. So, that was an extra stage, that progression from the old school silos to the Ops V2 approach. And if we move forward a little bit, the scenario started to change. A lot of companies starting to go into the concept of an embedded DevOps, right? Starting a bit of a spoke model here, a more bespoke model, where you had a DevOps engineer embedded in the development teams. This is going into the path of bespoke infrastructure or bespoke platform builds, because you have a specific dedicated person with your developers. So they share the same successes and the same pains. They all go to the same ceremonies. They all are part of the same stand-up, so they know what's going on. And if they know how to read or write code in the same language that your developers are doing, then it's almost picture perfect. There's an end-to-end DevOps way of doing things. Everyone knows what's going to happen. There is no it's your fault or it's my fault. No, it's ours because we're together. We all know what's going to happen. We all help each other push this code out, and maintain this infrastructure and make sure everything is as it's supposed to be for the customers. So this was really interesting, and it's really exciting as a DevOps engineer to be in one of those positions, because usually you have full freedom. You say, okay, what do you need? You as my development team, what do you need? And we agree on things, we agree on interfaces, we agree on deployments, we agree on the way that people want to do monitoring, and you just go on and do it and make sure that works. So you pick your tools, you pick your processes, you decide it with the team, and that's it. And this came about as well with more and more people doing cross-functional teams, right? So it's normal to have the developers, the testers, the DevOps, the product owners, all related or dedicated to a team. Obviously, sometimes you'd share the resources with other teams because it might be too much to have, for example, a product owner just for a team. But you have that unity, which is almost like a small startup. You have full autonomy. You can write in your own language. It's all microservice oriented. You have your own DevOps. Just go wild. Make it great for our company and great for our developers. You have this budget. As long as we keep that budget in check, just do what you have to do. And it's all very nice and good in theory. What then starts to happen is the companies start to grow or start adopting this more and more. And then you start having this. Right? The more dev teams you have, the more of each of the functions you also need. And the more DevOps engineers allocated to those you need. So you're starting to see, okay, this is starting to add up. There's more and more costs related to DevOps. But, we assign budget teams. So as long as they keep to their budget, it should be fine. We shouldn't really care about what's going on. But then that works for a while until the business itself starts to realize, wait a minute, we are doing a lot of bespoke stuff. We are doing monitoring times 6. We are doing logging times 6, CI/CD times 6, and there's no standardization anywhere. So if I, as a business, want KPIs for those teams, where do I get them? And the answer would be, I export this as a Prometheus metric and you can read it. But the other one could say, oh, but we prefer, Datadog, it's all in Datadog. So you have to, with all those integrations, you probably have to parse it differently. And someone else will say, hey, all CloudWatch, we just use CloudWatch, it's much simpler, it's that we don't have to pay for it, we use our budget elsewhere. And then everyone starts, scratching their heads, how are we going to make sense of all of this? So we kind of need some organization around this, because otherwise it's a bit chaotic. And okay, we have a budget for each team, but if I have £10,000 for a team and they're spending, each of them is spending 2K on monitoring, like maybe I could say, let's have each team contribute with only £500 and save 1,500 for something else and have a common monitoring system. So all these things start to come up because the Bespoke is starting to be too expensive in terms of budget, in terms of time, and also in terms of business visibility and control, especially if you start to think that some of these tools might need finance or legal to get involved, to get approval and sign-offs and POs raised and all of that. It starts to add up. So we're starting to realize that the Bespoke is starting to get heavy outside of that little niche of a couple of teams. So what started to happen as well is starting to go more into the hub and spoke approach, where you have, okay, let's solve this by having this core team or a central DevOps team that is God Almighty and controls what everyone else is supposed to do, which seems to solve the problem, right? You have an orchestrator, a coordinator in the center handling all these things, and you could still have all the independent DevOps doing what teams need to do. So the DevOps engineer becomes more of a liaison of the core team and the actual development team, which again, seems to solve the problem. They are part of the team. They are centralized, so they all know what each other are doing and what they should focus on. The problem is people are all very used to being embedded and having their own freedom to do things. So now all of a sudden you have something that says, wait, as a company, we need to standardize on some monitoring or at least on some interfaces, some APIs that are common for everyone. And that embedded DevOps engineer will tell you, yes, but I don't really like using, Nomad or this. I just, it's all going to be Kubernetes for me. I don't care about that. Or the other will say, nah, you know what, Datadog is good, but I actually prefer New Relic, or the other way. And they have their own opinions. They're very opinionated. They would like to do things in a particular way, maybe the way they're doing it before. And now this centralized power is not letting them do that. And that starts creating friction, because you either treat the embedded DevOps engineers as, the workers that do, the tasks that the core team decided to do, or you have the core team doing that work and the embedded engineers just kind of fine-tuning that to specific teams. But it starts to create that friction, and more of, the core team starts to become a blocker, because all the embedded DevOps engineers will just tell you, but if I had 2 days to do that, I would get it done. I could have that Helm chart from here, that cluster from there, I'd put it all together, and it just work, because they only have to focus on 7 devs or 8 or 15. Usually the teams are not bigger than that. So they can put something really good together that's going to hold and stand. But when you start looking at the core team, you say, well, wait, and I have to make something that works for everybody, and we all need to coordinate. And with all this process comes along, and things start to slow down, and people say, I'm tired of this. I don't want to do this. They don't let me do my job. They don't let me fix all the problems that my team have. And you can start to see that what was good in terms of having a unity between the team for the embedded DevOps engineers is good on that little world, because they're now part of the team, but it means that they don't want to be part of the DevOps team. They don't want to be no longer under control of that central core team. And then you start to think, okay, so what do we do now? Do I keep with just embedded and have that the bespoke cost? Do I go with a standardized approach? I have people problem. Is there a way to make people happy with this setup? No, how is it going to work? So all these things, like all this evolution and playing around with the way that the DevOps world happens, is interesting, and it's not as easy as sometimes in theory it might think. And just put the core team there or just embed them. There's always obviously pros and cons to everything, and you need to start thinking about those things as you're deciding how to approach this DevOps concept. And if we move forward a little bit more, we can add even more stuff into the confusion, because now SRE starts to become popular as a hiring and as a concept, as something that more and more people start seeing on meetups and talking about. And then a little bit of platform engineering as well. If you look at this Google trend chart that I found, it doesn't go further back from 2004, but SRE was kind of coined in 1998, if I'm not mistaken, or thereabouts. And the whole point was, this was created by Google because they wanted to ensure that their site was reliable, and it was done by engineers. So this is all the site reliability engineer is and came about. It obviously progressed throughout the years to be better defined, and obviously internally they started expanding it more and more on that and applying it more and more. But if you look at the graph, it has a slow, gradual progress, right? Awareness. It hasn't spiked. It hasn't suddenly come into vogue. It's not a fashion. It's just something that naturally, organically started to go slowly. So it's always been around. And DevOps, not so much. It was pretty much non-existent until eventually everyone decided that DevOps was a thing, and off the chart goes. And then this is where all these experiments start, with the embedded, the core, the single. Is it a DevOps team? Is it something else? So it's a bit all over the place. And if you look at platform engineering, you can barely see it. Like that blue little line in there, which is a concept that is starting to gain a little bit of popularity, but it's nothing compared to the buzzwords, the keywords of SRE and DevOps. And if you actually look at, I just went into Indeed.com and find some jobs about SRE and DevOps around London, and DevOps has 4 times more jobs than SRE. And interestingly enough, if you look at the SRE jobs, most of them are actually very similar to the DevOps roles. So they're not true SRE. If you start filtering down, it's much less pure, true SRE roles available. So now, on top of all of the different approaches to handle DevOps, now you also have SRE. So the company says, okay, should I do SRE? What does it mean to do SRE? Do I just do another rebranding, like Ops to DevOps and DevOps to SRE? Is that what it is? So the whole thing started to, become quite all over the place. And that, again, I was talking to recruiters a lot, and finding the roles and finding the contracts and see what people are doing and going to meetups. It's really hard to find a common standard. SRE should have a common standard because it comes from Google, and Google kind of maintains the way that SRE is supposed to be if you want to be true to Google or true to what SRE means. But it's still going wildly into different scopes. And DevOps doesn't have that. It's just a concept that everyone started to take to themselves and defining, this is what DevOps means to me, and this is what DevOps means to that person. So it's very all over the place, and it's interesting to see all those things coming together. So if we now go into a bit more into platform engineering, it's kind of the way that DAZN went about to handle the situation. When I joined DAZN, we had a single SRE team, and we still have a few things that reminisce to those days, that like labels and catalog stuff that is still called SRE, that we haven't fully migrated to a platform concept. But we realized that we're doing a lot of SRE. We had nice projects about centralized logging, making sure we had standards for those things. It was reliable and well monitored and good observability on those things. But we're also doing things that were completely unrelated to SRE. And the core of us just felt, this is not true, right? We're not, why are we calling ourselves just SREs when we do a lot more than SRE? Maybe something, needs to change. And obviously the company is also growing, with scale, as we saw, came other problems, right? When we looked at the embedded SREs, you have a couple of teams, a few teams, it's manageable. When you're looking at DAZN, which has, dozens of teams, development teams, it becomes a problem. Right? It's hard to say, let's hire 100 DevOps engineers to be embedded. It's like, do we need that? Is that an option? Because does it make sense? So it's with scale, like everything else, you need to start thinking about things in a slightly different way. And this is why we have this concept of platform engineering, right? At the end of the day, this is what we do. We engineer a platform. And to do that properly, you need to focus on several different areas. So what ends up happening is we have a team, a platform team. We're all engineers in there. So everything adds up, everything makes sense. And we have 3 different sub-teams within it. SRE, right, which is, we try to be as close to the definition as possible and do things the right way, and focus more and more on observability, reliability, tooling. Now, there's a nice blog article about the different types of SREs, right? Because there's, again, people start to adapt these things to what makes sense to them. But at the end of the day, you're all focusing on making sure that your systems are reliable, are performant, are well tuned. There's standardizations for all these things. You take a software engineering view to these problems. And again, sometimes a bit of misconception. And in my view, I don't think you need to be a hardcore software engineer to do this. You need to apply software engineering practices to this. Like, this is the core definition, is what happens if you put a software engineer in charge of operations. Like, this is one of the core definitions of SRE. And as long as you have that mentality, right, you can do that. It's about taking those things into mind, like, and putting in practice those common standards for logging, for monitoring, being a point of reference, helping other teams apply good SRE practices, so you can join them for a while and then go back to the SRE team to create the standards. So obviously we're still on a journey. This is not final, like anything in life. We're always adapting and learning from it and getting feedback. It's far from perfect, but we have those guidelines. This is the goal, right? So as long as we have this goal, we try not to stray too much from that line and keep doing that. So this is what the SRE kind of sub-team within platform does. We also have a developer experience team. I like to think of it as a from devs to devs, right? A lot of them have the development mindset. They are developers themselves. And the whole point is making development live easier for everyone. Right? There's what we want to avoid is that sort of, core team or platform team or the central team is saying something and we have no voice, we have no opinion. No, we kind of have this sort of, it's not a PR machine, but the feeling of having someone whose job is to focus on the development experience, development happiness, the way that we can make the company move forward happily and fast and with common tools and approaches that everyone's happy with, and they're not pushed. It's a community. People can relate to the whole platform, and particularly with DX, to understand how things are going and what needs to be done. Right? And there's a lot of projects that DX has been dealing with. For example, things like internal open sourcing and on working on the CI/CD front and tooling. Simple things I'd say, but simple concepts like deployment dashboards and reusability of code, all of that as a single entity. We work with the developers, we understand what the problems are, what exists. We try to get surveys out, understand what people think, get feedback, get meetings with them. And from that, we collate all the information. We realize, okay, this is what we need to focus on. This is how we're going to make everyone's lives better. We're not doing it just because we want to or because it's cool. We're actually doing it because it needs to be done. And we, as developers in developer experience, have experienced all these pains in the past, so we can relate to it. And we're going to make the platform that everyone else uses enjoyable. Again, it's a work in progress, but there's a lot of stuff happening within this. And the final team, the one I work most closely with, is the cloud engineering team. Again, we use AWS a lot. We're cloud based. We use a lot of AWS, and we have hundreds of accounts on AWS that we have to manage. We have a foot on GCP. That's a growing presence. We just started looking into Azure and have some things running on Azure, some mainly related to Active Directory, but there's those things starting to come up, and we have to make sure these things are seamless. How do people are going to authenticate that across those clouds? How is the cloud supporting the people? What can we create to make their lives easier? What kind of templates, modules? How do we make sure we have security principles onboarded on everything that we do? How do we standardize? Because if you think about it, when you have hundreds of accounts, dozens of teams, and hundreds of container clusters and this and that, you can't just do bespoke on that. It just be too expensive. It's like saying that everyone's going to be driving a Rolls Royce. Even if they could afford it, you couldn't have everyone driving a Rolls Royce because it's so time consuming. There's so much manual effort to building one of those things that people just have to go with more common, more standardized cars and approaches, because you can build them a lot faster and maintain them better. And this is kind of the same principle. Okay, bespoke would be great, but let's be realistic. The cost versus benefit, does it add up? So this is everything that we need to keep in mind as we do these decisions. And we're looking at simplifying integration with all the third parties. AWS has loads of products, but what we want to say to people is you can do pretty much whatever you need to do to get that product out, to make the customers happy and to innovate and do all that. And we're trying to help you by creating a layer on top of these clouds. So you expect that you're going to be given all of these set of standard tools and systems, and kind of everything works the same. So it takes a lot of work from you, but at the same time, we can't go all the way and do a full customization just for you. You kind of have to come down and meet us halfway, so we can do something that it's feasible, that scales, that's maintainable, and that doesn't really block you that much, so you can actually do your job. And part of it is being there to supporting the teams and engineering the solutions. We don't want to be, as platform, the only team that can do architecture or can do changes or that can do cool stuff. It's not about that. It's about making sure that for the things that developers need, we find solutions and we give it to them. And because DX, for example, is really into creating this sort of internal open sourcing, and all our code is pretty much all our code is internal open source, we many times just say, look, is it not doing what you need? I mean, great. Ask for some time on your sprint, look at it, raise the PR, we'll look at it, we'll merge it, and everyone else is going to take advantage of it. So it doesn't have to wait for a platform to do something. Everyone can come and contribute as long as they have the willingness and obviously the time and the knowledge. They can just suggest, and I really like this, would you mind if I would take a look? And we just say, go wild, go free, as long as everyone else can then reuse that, and it's not just custom bespoke thing that you need to do, then feel free. And this sort of culture that we're trying to build fosters both innovation without getting people blocked on things and without going crazy off the standard approach that we're trying to get for the company in terms of tooling and systems that we use. So this is kind of where we're trying to forget about the DevOps team or the DevOps flow. Everyone kind of has to do DevOps. There isn't a team or a person responsible for that. Everyone does that. And this kind of leads me to, if I can get my mouse to move forward, the keys to success that we've kind of identified through this journey. We divided this platform team to conquer. We don't want to get a single giant team that's really hard to manage, but we can't just go into a multitude of small teams within platform or with embedded engineers everywhere. It's just not maintainable. It doesn't scale. So we got a balance there. Let's focus on a few key areas that we know we want to make sure we implement proper SRE practices. We are cloud-based, so we need a lot of cloud-related work to be done. So let's get a team for that. And we need to make sure our developers identify with us and can relate to us and can raise things, and we can help them and make their lives easier. So we have a DX team, all within platform. So we're still the same team. We have a common stand-up every week as platform, so we all know what each other are doing. There's no silence. Doesn't mean that just because you're in cloud that you can't work with SRE on something. Like a good example is we have HashiCorp Vault, and we have some proprietary stuff that we do internally to manage accesses and the way we organize our Vault namespaces and all of that. And part of it is done with SRE, and part of it is done with cloud. So we're constantly on meetings and making sure the tickets are aligned and we're not blocking each other and planning things. So we work closely together. The point is not to have completely disjoint teams. We have to work together. We're still platform. We just specialize a little bit on a few different areas, so we can have better defined roadmaps. Smaller teams, so we can have better stand-ups and retros and all of that. So it's about being practical and doing things that make sense in our organization. Again, this makes perfect sense for us the way we work. For other people, might not be the case, but this is the success that we had is by doing this sort of thing. And again, standardizing by default, and then customizing if and where we can. So there's no way with a smallish team like we have compared to the number of people in the organization to handle the scale. Like I said, loads and loads, like multiple clouds, multiple systems. Like we don't want to say, for example, we are a Kubernetes shop. We have a team that manages Kubernetes, for example. That alone wouldn't happen. Like we don't have a team just to manage a specific product. We manage dozens of products. Like we have each team we've been collecting that over the years, and it's like a substantial number, like dozens and dozens of systems and products and solutions that we manage to make everything as a platform work nicely. So we can't just focus on a particular tool. So these things need to scale. These things need to be standard. We need to say, okay, there's a new feature that we need to test. Okay, we're going to test it, but if it works, we're going to roll it out to everyone. And it needs to be simple and effective. We can't then plan for 2 weeks or a month to do this crazy rollout and complex. No, it needs to be standard, easy to deploy. And if we can make customizations on top of that without breaking this concept, great, we'll do it and make people's lives even better. But we can't go to that crazy tailored suit experience, because it's just not scalable. It'd just be too costly, even on personal resources to do that. And doing that internal open source, make sure everyone can see each other's code and can contribute to it safely. And this is critical. The same thing that with open source in the public, if Terraform doesn't do what you need, you just open a PR and ask for it to be merged because it makes sense. So we do the same internally. If it's done by platform, if it's done by any of the development teams, it doesn't matter. You find where the code is, you suggest enhancements, you support those enhancements if you want to, and they get rolled out. It's as simple. It's not, we don't want to be the gods. We don't want to have all the authority. It's open. We just happen to be the ones that lead that charge, but everyone can contribute to it. Self-servicing the platform. This is a big one for us that we're still not completely there, but we need to work more and more on it. Because we don't want to be a blocker, we would like to say, go there and release it yourself, do it yourself. We do a lot of it on a PR basis, and it works really well for that. People can just raise a PR, we'll review it. If it makes sense, merge it, off it goes, gets deployed. That's great. But as the audiences sometimes change and not everyone is technical, telling a product person to say, go to GitHub, raise a PR, change a few Terraform files, and off you go. You're good to deploy. I say, okay, GitHub, I'm not really comfortable with it. PRs, so we might need to get more and more abstractions on top of it. But again, this goes on the way of how can we standardize it? We don't want to just create an abstraction that a couple of people are going to use. If we're going to do this, it needs to be a proper abstraction, properly maintained, something that we can monitor and have good observability. And you can see where these things start to come together. And like DX, does it make sense to roll this out to everyone? So we don't want to just, hack something together, put it there, and then have to maintain a hacky solution for the rest of our lives, because that's how we create legacy, because it's just a bespoke solution here, a bespoke solution there. And it starts really hard to maintain all of that. Right? And providing top level support to our internal customers, right? All our developers. We want to make sure, and I think we're quite proud of saying that we do support people. When we like organization, like we like people to come through standard channels so we can organize our work, so we can track what we're doing, see where we need to optimize, right? We need to, do a little bit better at that, but we're on that journey. And what this allows us to do is people know if they have an issue, they contact platform, and usually within minutes, we're chatting with them, trying to see what's going on. We have dedicated people that we rotate to be kind of our point of contacts. So there's not just a single person that people get used to contacting, but a team. And if they need to dig down into something that doesn't seem to work, or if they're having issues with whatever they're doing, we're there to help. But at the same time, we need to track this time, because if we spend too much time helping people on a particular subject, it's because maybe documentation isn't clear. Maybe the code is not as good as it should be. Maybe there's bugs somewhere, and then we might need to focus on those things. So it's important that we track these metrics. But as long as people feel engaged, they don't feel bad about this. Okay, all the code might have, it's natural code has bugs. It might happen. So if they come into one and they raise to us and they help us fix it, and the problem is solved, great, move on. Such is life. But if there's a problem and no one helps them for a long time, the frustration adds up. Like, this core team, this platform team, this DevOps team, they don't do anything. So we're trying to be open about this and like communicate, be honest. What is our roadmap? What we're trying to do? Like, why are we doing these things? Again, a process of improvement on this, but we have our own internal blog. We're trying to write more and more about the success and the failures. Even this week, we wrote a blog post about something that we're testing out, and it's not really fit for purpose. It's not really production ready. So we told everyone, look, we tested it. It's not like we're asleep. We know it's in there, but it's not really good. And these are the reasons why we're not doing it for everyone. And this is why we don't recommend anyone to be doing that. So it's open and honest, and people know. They might not agree with it, but then they can raise it with us and say, I don't agree with that point. Maybe if you looked at this, did you try something else? And that also helps us, because we might not have realized about that. If someone tells us, actually, you're wrong, because you could do it this way, that way, and that actually work, we might say, that's a very good point. I didn't think about that. Let's reevaluate. Right? So it's not final, and it kind of fosters, again, conversation and a sense of community, that we're all trying to work for the common good, but there's rules for everything. And something that's really important for us, the platform team, is, agile is not chaos. We need to do things, relatively quickly. We need to react to, the market, the way things are going, to the problems, to everything, and adapt and get feedback. But it's not chaotically doing so. Like I mentioned before, if someone needs an interface for something, we're not just going to say, all right, give me half an hour, I'll hack some bash scripts, put them all together, and I'll solve your problem. That's chaos, because you're going to start doing that for everyone else. There's no structure, there's no organization for any of the stuff that you're doing. And you end up with a lot of flimsy code everywhere, poorly documented, that other people don't know. And this is not the way to do it. So we go to a lot of effort to make sure that even internally, for example, in the cloud team, we rotate people around. So we try to make sure that everyone touches every project. So, okay, they might not be experts on it, depending on how long they spent on them, but they had exposure. They know where to find things. They know what it is about. And if they need to do something further along the line about it, it will ring a bell. So they can go and find the information, and they know roughly who was involved on that project most of the time, and they can go and get help and training on that. So it's, again, all about communication, even internally within the team, and having organization onto things. Have plan stuff, do it correctly. Don't just go wildly and try to find quick solutions that sometimes might be the best way of doing it. Other times might be the worst thing you can do. Right? And again, on hiring, I think this is one of probably the biggest cons, because it makes things a lot difficult. Because we want people that practice DevOps. We don't necessarily want the DevOps as an engineer or to be a team. We want people that know what DevOps should be, how to practice. Even development teams, when they're hiring people, they're not just hiring a top-notch, React developer or Java developer or whatever it is. That person needs to know about cloud computing. They need to know about how to use what design patterns exist and how they can be used, and if they used it in the past. Right? They need to know a little bit about infrastructure as code, because our development teams write code, write their tests, write their pipelines, create their own dashboards. They write their own Terraform for deployment. They do all that. We try to do it in a way that they reuse a lot of either modules that we create or solutions that we build or that other teams have done. Right? And this is the beauty of it, because it's all open source. If a team needs to do something, we can just tell, you know what, that team did exactly the same thing. Why don't you go and ask him and get help from them? And people start, talking to each other instead of always being, central to them to central, central to them to central. You start getting people to talk to each other. It becomes more of a spider web of resources. So you no longer become a blocker. You reuse a lot of the code between all those teams. But getting people that have that experience is a bit harder, because they might be used to an environment where I don't care, my DevOps writes my pipelines, or it sorts out all the monitoring. Right? Our development teams are on call for their products. So if they have a problem with their load balancer, they are the ones that get woken up. And if it's a misconfiguration that they did because they're filtering a query string wrong or whatever, then they are the ones fixing it. But if it's a problem with the underlying way that the platform is set up, or it's just something completely wrong, or that was broken in a release, then they call us and say, look, this is not our problem. All our part is looking fine. Can you help us investigate? And then we go in and help them and work together to figure out where the problem is, and we sort it out. So there's end-to-end ownership of the development team, and there's also us knowing about how things work. And because it's standardized, if a team has a problem, we don't have to think, okay, what custom solution did we build for you? What was that setting? Why was it there? It doesn't exist. It's standard. We know, oh, it should be doing this. And if it's not, we broke it somewhere, and we can kind of more easily get engaged with those people. And at the same time, people need to be, a great team fit and have solid core skills, and not so much going for keyword matching. Okay, you might have used this tool, but you had used a tool that has the same concept, has the same purpose, and that's good enough. Right? The important thing is the engineering side is there. People can code, people can work with cloud, people can work with a team. They are team players. You might be the best person in the world on that particular subject, but if it's impossible to work with you, it's not going to work, right? Because we are a team. We work with other teams within platform, and we work with the rest of the business, and that's it. You're not just going to go into a silo. You're not going to get given a set of requirements and you just go and implement it. No, you need to think. You need to engineer. You need to come up with solutions. You need to try them. You need to discuss them with the rest of the teams. You have to communicate it out. So there's a lot of this interpersonal skills and team fit and being a team player, on top of having some solid core skills to be able to actually do the job. And that's, again, tricky, because it's not just about go to this website and filter everyone that has Kubernetes and Terraform and AWS in their CV and hire them. No, it's not about that. It's about taking a different approach to recruitment. And this is kind of how we built the platform team, why we built it. Right? It came from this evolution of DevOps and SRE and the Bespoke and the standard, and what we felt actually worked for us about creating standard platform, creating a layer on top of all the infrastructure and all the vendors and everything else that exists in there, simplifying it for everyone in the business, and then allowing them to build on top of that. if it's standard enough, they can just say, okay, I'm going to use this component and that component and that component, and going to build my solution around it, and then tweak the settings that my application actually needs to work well. But I already have a set of components that I don't have to worry about. I know that if I send my logs with this standard format that the company agreed on, they're going to show up, and they're going to show up with the correlation ID and this and that, and I can just filter them. It doesn't matter what application it is that I'm using. I can filter all applications in the company as long as they're using the correct logging format. And that's powerful. This is where standardization comes from. Everyone uses the same approach and the same formats, and everyone can contribute to change the formats if they find it that it didn't work. And as soon as that happens, everyone else, if we create common libraries, they'll just say, okay, I want the new DAZN library logging version 2 instead of version 1. Great. And everyone gets the new enhancements automatically. And the developers can do that themselves. Like, they can push for that to happen. So they own the code as much as everyone else. And this is what we're trying to do and empower the business to do as a platform team. Not be the owners, but be the facilitators of the improvements within the company. So I hope I made it clear enough without putting everyone to sleep about what this journey was and how we do platform engineering at DAZN and what it is about. So thanks very much. I think now it's time for Joe to take over again.
Oh, thank you very much, Luis. That was brilliant, very engaging. A few tips in there for me as well as a recruiter. So we've just got a few questions in, I guess, before we wrap up. Firstly, we've got Hussein asking, what level of coding is required to work efficiently as DevOps, SRE, cloud engineering? Is there any substantial difference, Luis?
This is very generic, because as I said, different companies do different things and consider SRE and DevOps to be completely different things. So that would vary. But I'd say for us, it's about knowing the principles to start with. It'd be amazed how many people apply to SRE positions without even knowing what SRE job is, like the concepts are. And worse than that is they're applying and they say they come from an SRE position, and it's okay, so what language did you use? I didn't code that much, and I code like once every 6 months, a little bit of Python. Like, okay, that's not a disqualifier in any way, but then why didn't you do it? Do you want to do it? How do you want to do it? How would you solve your problems about doing it? Because again, we're trying to hire people for the long term. So if you like, we use Golang a lot as a standardization. The language the platform uses is Golang. We hire people that have only written in Python and no Golang. That's not a problem. The problem is, are you happy to do it? Like, if you find a problem in Terraform, for example, and this is an interview question, but there you go. Now, sometimes if you find a problem in Terraform, what you do, and we try and engage people and see what they do. And some of them say, I don't know much about Golang, but I can copy paste the code from the others and try and make it work. Okay, that's a start. Great, that shows initiative. So what is your coding level? What's your skill set? And we try and go from there. Some people just say, yeah, it doesn't work. Tough luck. I'll just write Terraform, and then out of that, I'll write a bash script and hack that together, and then I write a Python script. That won't work. That's brittle. That's complicated. Let's try and find a nice way, a nice engineered solution for that. And it doesn't matter if you've been coding for 10 years, or if you're a fan of TDD, or if you're a fan of that language. It's not so much about that. It's about having the right mentality. You can engineer, you can write code, you can solve your problems with code. You know where your strong points are and where your not so strong points are, and what you want to learn. And if you have the right fit and you have the right knowledge, not being a guru in a particular language is not a disqualifier. We'd rather have someone that wants to learn and has the correct mindset of engineering to someone that says, I'm a great React developer, but I only write in React. If you want me to solve a problem in Go, tough luck, I'm not going to do it. So what good does that do us, right? We need to solve problems, and we need to be team players and use the standardization tools that we chose. So if you can't adapt to this, and if you don't want us help build something good on top of the standardization that we build, then it's not going to work. Okay? So it's not so much about the level of coding, is, the approach that you take to it. You have to have used it, obviously. If you never coded in your life, then it's an even harder challenge. But as long as you have the minimums and you're willing to progress on that, and it's something that excites you and you want to actually do more, then that's not a problem.
Brilliant. Hope that answered your question, Hussein. So Tristy's asking as well for you, Luis, what are your views about traditional or old school service management frameworks?
I try to avoid getting into the management work or the team organization or all of that. I tend to try and focus more on the technical side of things rather than the organization. This is why we have dedicated managers, and we have the head of platform engineering to try and focus more on all of this sort of organization of the company and of the teams. And most of these ideas come from them. I try to focus more on the technical side of things, but what I always try to, and I work closely with them, and what I always try to avoid is, let's not make too much process. Let's not try to create too much process into things. Like if you start looking at things like TOGAF and ITIL and all of that, it's a nightmare. It's so much like different concept and things that you have to follow that you become drowned into that world, and you stop doing things. Maybe it makes sense for you to do it, but you don't do it because the process doesn't let you. It's okay. It's not like DevOps is, again, it's about getting rid a little bit of that process and making the things that make sense. There's nothing wrong with those frameworks and applying 30, 40-year-long processes. But I think what we need to understand is, and a lot that comes to technology comes from industry, right? This is where Agile, Scrum, and all that came from. And I think we need to learn about that. The industry does most of it when it goes to scale. It standardizes things. You don't have all options. You have a set of options for colors, for engines, for builds on your car, and that's it. You don't have complete customization because it's really hard. And if we take those learnings from those industries, we know, okay, let's take what is good, but let's not be drowned in process. Let's get something to make sure things work, but let's do the minimum amount of process to make things work efficiently. I'm a big fan of the 80-20 rule, right? Let's do a lot of it. Let's take the bulk of the advantage with the little the effort, because when you start going to those 20%, you really need to make sure that you know what you're doing and that it makes sense to do. So when you start talking about frameworks and all of that, I always start getting a bit scared and push it a bit back. Is it really necessary? Or are you introducing the framework and the policies because you want that top right corner, but to introduce that you say, no, we have to introduce this framework and everything else comes attached. If you don't need it, don't use the framework, just use the bit that you need. So, okay, you say we don't implement it completely. We just take the bits that make sense into our use case, and that's it. I think this is where, the DevOps concepts and practices should be. This is why they were introduced, right? It's get rid of process. Don't get locked out into those little details. Like, make things work, make the business, move forward, be agile, be rapid. But also, it's not chaos, like I mentioned. Just don't do whatever comes to your mind. Have some organization, but have the minimum necessary to achieve the goals. Don't get locked to those frameworks or to whatever everyone else is doing or whatever, it's popular. Do what makes sense for you to do. That's my suggestion.
Cool. Excellent. We've got time for a couple more. So Neil Turner is asking, how does your approach, Luis, in standard and platform engineering compare to the you build it, you run it approaches?
A lot of what we do is you build it, you own it. It's just about where the base of the building is. Because as I mentioned, all the teams own their products. They have end-to-end ownership. They build their services and they own it completely. Right? We're none the wiser about that. So they use their development languages according to what the company defines or what they agree with, architecture, etc. They have full autonomy. We don't care, and they own it end to end, which is why they build their own dashboards. They figure out their pipelines. They can do it whatever they want. Right? They can fan in, fan out, twist, up, down, whatever. It's up to them. They do whatever they want, as long as they build it on our platform. Right? So there's some standardization that needs to happen if they want to run with Docker containers, which the whole company does. Right? Then they find and deploy the clusters with the setups that we manage. Right? When they do their logging, they know they have to respect the RFC that we set up for them, so the logs magically show up in the right place. So they don't have to worry about that, as long as they respect these, and let's call it interfaces, right? As long as they respect that, everything just magically works. Their monitoring is there, their logging is there. They know if there's something wrong, what is the team they need to contact. They have their own AWS accounts to test their stuff, and if they break it, they only break their own stuff. They don't break anybody else's. So all of that structure is there. The authentication process, integration with third parties, it's all there. They don't have to worry about it. But then we give them, okay, once we have this layer for you, you go wild. You do what you need to do to make the business successful. And sometimes if we don't have a solution for them for what they need, they can just go and build it themselves. And what most likely is going to happen is we're going to incorporate that as part of the platform for others to be able to use. Right? We're starting to use more and more some like feature flag concepts and a bit of customization through that front, where you could say, okay, we have all these set of systems that you can use, but if you don't need them, let's tone down a little bit of the complexity. Let's just deploy what you actually need right now. If you need something else, you can go there, flip the switch, it redeploys, and you now magically have a new cluster for this or something else. Right? So it's all about empowering them, making their lives easier, not duplicate efforts between the team. But when we reach that point where it's unique to the team, then they own it, they build it, it's completely for them. And this is kind of the trade-off that we found to make sure we have standardized and something custom at the same time, because we standardize a lot of it, but we don't deny people the possibility of being creative and of using different things and using whatever load balancing algorithms they want, for example, and whatever they want to do, they're free to do that because they own it. And if they break it, again, they own it. So this is the trade-off we try to do. We don't want to be customizing things for them, but we also don't want to tell them that they want to do everything from scratch, because it would be too painful for everyone. So if we find a duplicate, we try to own it. Okay, so from this point on, we own this part of the duplicate, so you guys can stop worrying about it and just worrying on what you actually need to do to make the business great. Use as much of the standard platform as you can. If you can't, let's have a chat, and you might as well just implement what you need, and we'll absorb it. We'll make it internal open source. We'll grow from it.
Fantastic. And last one, Luis, before we wrap up. So Tristy's asking as well, do you use any skills frameworks to create career pathways within and amongst teams?
Oof, that's I think beyond my pay grade about there's a lot. There's a few things changing, I think, in the way that the skills framework are being set. The zone is quite interesting. We are relatively startup-y and relatively new as the zone, but we come from a split from a larger company. So even though we're quite recent on the market and we still have a lot of the startup attitude, let's try different things, let's try different projects, let's go wild, release, let's see how it goes. At the same time, we have hundreds and hundreds of people from the organization, which is not normal for like a for-year-old company or whatever to have that many people. So all of this is also still in the works, how this is going to work, all those career paths. But obviously there are some things already in place. We try not to segment in too many levels. Like all our engineers are kind of treated as engineers. We don't have junior, middle level, senior. It's something that's being studied internally about how this is going to progress. But I'm more of a consumer of that than an organizer, because this goes from a lot higher up, how the whole company organizes and how the skills are managed. We do our own thing within the teams, right? What we want people to train, how we do 20% time or what do you want to do in conferences and training and internal training portals. All of that exists within the team. And I think as a company, a more structured approach is also in the works. But probably, even if I knew, I probably wouldn't be able to tell those things. I don't know how these things work, but I have no idea. It's way beyond what I usually deal with.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Luis. I think that brings us to an end, guys. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Please don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn as well for updates about future events. And if you've got any ideas about any topics that you'd like to hear about, or even something you'd want to talk about as well, feel free to get in touch. So we'll be sending out a feedback form as well around. If you could just let us know what your thoughts were on this, it'd be really helpful in terms of planning for future sessions. And again, Luis, thank you very much for your time and your presentation today. It was brilliant. And enjoy your weekend, everyone.
Thanks very much, everyone. See you later.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.